Devon is a beautiful county, and sitting right at the heart of it, you can find Dartmoor. Dartmoor is known for its stunning views and grazing lands, and yet is notorious for its dangerously rapid weather changes. On Dartmoor, you can find many rock formations known as tors, freestanding rocky outcrops that arise abruptly from smooth and gentle slopes surrounding them. These tors are particularly common in the southwest of England, with Dartmoor being home to over 160 of them. Interestingly, these tors aren't actually that old, or at least not in the grand scheme of planet Earth, being exposed for no more than 200,000 years, and in a lot of cases less. However, for the purpose of history, that's still a bloody long time. Anyway, what's brought me to Dartmoor for today's video is the tor known as Hound Tor, located on the eastern side of Dartmoor, allegedly named as such because from a certain angle the formation is meant to look like a dog or something, and according to local legend was formed when a pack of hounds were turned to stone. Situated only a short detour from the B3387 between Bovey Tracy and Woodcombe in the Moor, Hound Tor is pretty accessible for Dartmoor and even has its own car park. The rock formation is gorgeous, and I'm sure somebody more interested in geography than I would foam at the mouth at a place such as this. However, what we're interested in today hides behind the tor, for it's here where one can stumble upon the remnants of a remote medieval settlement. What remains of the village, referred to simply as the Hound Tor medieval village and is sometimes known as Hound Tor, is little more than an outline, excavated between 1961 and 1975. Little remains, but what is there is prominent, and a lot can be gathered from these old stones. The hamlet consists of a collection of 4 stone longhouses inside which a family would live and sleep on one end and the animals would sleep at the other. Also, several smaller buildings and barns likely for the storage of grain that are dated back to around the 13th century. Being relatively remote, of course, the primary function of this village would have been farming. Human occupation of the area, however, dates way further back than the 13th century, with the remains of a prehistoric farmstead only a few hundred metres to the northwest of this settlement, and Bronze Age hut circles that can be seen from the top of the tor. According to a reference in the Domesday Book, for context, that was a manuscript record of England and Wales completed in 1086 by order of William the Conqueror in order to survey every shire in England, list holdings and calculate dues owed to him. The village itself had been occupied since the 8th century. The Domesday Book also notes that the settlement was owned by Tavistock Abbey, also known as the Abbey of St Mary in St Ruman, a Benedictine abbey in Tavistock, Devon, located only 20 miles away from the site. Tavistock Abbey owned considerable amounts of land holdings in both Devon and Cornwall between the 10th and 16th centuries. Pollen analysis suggests farming in the area had stopped by 1350, but pottery found on the site suggests that the village likely remained occupied in some capacity up until either the late 14th or early 15th century. But why was this place abandoned? Well, there are 2 major possibilities here. A third would be shits and giggles, but apparently this video is meant to be educational. Firstly, Britain's weather deteriorated much like other places in Europe during the 14th century. The winters were agonisingly cold and the summers weren't much better, primarily being wet and chilly. The cause was believed to be a volcanic eruption in New Zealand. This led to the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, alongside later smaller famines throughout the 14th century. A century of on and off famines likely damaged a remote village such as this to the point where many occupants would pack up and move elsewhere where survival was more likely. The other possible reason was far worse. During the 14th century, plague struck Europe. The Black Death decimated Devon not dissimilarly to anywhere else. By the time it had run its course, roughly a third of Devon's population had perished to the disease. Hound Tor may seem remote, however, it was not at a disconnect from the society around it, and therefore there's no reason to believe that it was spared from the plague. And again, under these conditions, the chances of a small village's survival would decrease once more. In reality, it's likely a combination of these two reasons. Plague and famine is effectively a historical double whammy catalyst for the decline of locations such as this. In wake of these factors, it's entirely possible the village had ceased farming by the middle of the 14th century as its purpose had faded to history. The onslaught of a deadly disease sweeping the whole of Europe and the famines caused by unusual and unfavourable changes to weather likely stripped Hound Tor of its primary function. In order to survive, its inhabitants likely had to simply drift elsewhere. Those who lived here left little behind in wake of their departure. Dartmoor's acidic soil likely destroyed most of the evidence that remained, and excavations did not unearth much, yet they did uncover a single coin dated to the reign of Henry III, the English king who ruled between 1216 and 1272. Today, all that remains of the Hound Tor medieval village are the rocks that lay its foundations. Allegedly, this small village is one of the most famous deserted medieval villages in all of England, out of thousands that can be found dotted across the country, and when visiting this place, you can certainly see why. Standing in the ruins of a village abandoned around 700 years ago is a fascinating feeling, and you can't help but imagine what this place must have been like when people lived here. The surroundings are also breathtaking. Nothing quite does the tours of Dartmoor justice quite like seeing them for yourself. Then of course I do suppose you have the nature. You'll see no shortage of wildlife while out exploring on Dartmoor. This is a fascinating site to visit, but if you do make the trip, please bear in mind that Dartmoor's roads can get a little narrow. Sod it, Devon's roads in general can be a bit of a mini nightmare, and driving with caution isn't just advised, but necessary unless you want to wind up with a pagged motor in the middle of nowhere and limited phone signal so you can die of exposure. Also, Dartmoor's weather is notorious for changing quickly. There is limited shade nor shelter, so go prepared, bring a friend, or let somebody know where you're going, and of course, respect the site. And that brings us nicely to the end of this video on the deserted medieval village that can be found at Hound Tor. Thank you all for watching. We really hope that you enjoyed. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that fantastic stuff, and I'm basically just copying my outro from my main channel. If it isn't broken, don't fix it. And with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, take care and goodbye.